Good morning and welcome to this joint executive decision session. Oh, we've got a bit of crackling coming from somewhere. Is that? It's not on. It's just got a problem. Thank you. Apologies for that, everyone. Hopefully that resolves the crackling. Great. Thank you. Thanks, colleagues, for sorting that out. Sure, that would have been very annoying had it carried on. I'm Councillor Katie Lomas, and although the published agenda says that Councillor Pavlovic will be starting off, we've switched agenda items slightly, so we're going to do item number 8 ahead of item number 6 on the agenda. So I'm going to start as chair, and then Councillor Pavlovic will take over once we've done that item number 8. So that covers the chairing arrangements. We don't have any apologies for absence, I don't think. Declarations of interest, I have none. Councillor Pavlovic has none either. Great, that moves us on to the minutes of the combined executive member decision session held on Tuesday, the 4th of November. Any comments or anything to raise from those minutes? No. I don't have anything. That's great. I shall sign those then afterwards. And that moves us swiftly on to public participation. We have one public speaker today. Councillor Vassie, would you like to come forward? As you well know, you have 3 minutes. Do you want me to give you a 30-second warning?
No, I think I'll be within this one way or the other.
Fantastic. Off you go, Councillor Vassie.
Conservation officers are employed to protect the past. I get it, but that's not what we're here for as elected councillors. We are here to provide balance, to preserve the past, certainly, but not at the expense of the present or the future. We're required to look at the big picture. This historic windows note in your agenda is almost entirely comprised of things that others are not allowed to do. There is almost zero reference to climate change or the imperative to act on improving the thermal efficiency of buildings. And where is the acknowledgement that the UK has the worst insulated buildings in Europe? At this point, I could focus on negative comments about how the council's approach is letting the city down, of fractious planning meetings, of missed opportunities. Instead, I'll focus on the positives that come from setting a better course. Better presented and worded, this document can be helping develop our specialist craft skills. Because of the high number of historic buildings, we have a range of expert craftspeople working in York. By encouraging the sympathetic adaptation, repair and maintenance of our old buildings, we can not only help those buildings, we can also expand our craft skills and nurture an industry and create new jobs. We can show the younger generation that it is possible to protect and cherish the past without doing it at the expense of the future. We can give people hope. I suggest to you that you formally incorporate the full text of Historic England's introduction to its Advice Note 18 in this document before approving it, not just tucked away in an appendix. You could start with the introduction to Advice Note 18. It reads, as historic buildings continue to change and evolve, they need to contribute to a greener future and be fit for purpose for the people who live in, experience and care for them. If done thoughtfully and carefully, changes to historic buildings can achieve the complementary goals of protecting our heritage and adapting to climate change. Keeping historic buildings in use through sensitive repair, maintenance and adaptation can help to reduce carbon emissions, reliance on fossil fuels and energy costs. The Historic England document also includes case studies on all manner of historic buildings, from houses to halls, farms to cathedrals. They show positivity, leadership and innovation. Thanks to them, York Minster has got solar panels on its roof. Let's learn from the best. Across our continent, there are many examples of historic buildings with bespoke secondary double glazing. The Palais des Ducs in Dijon, the Château de Gruyère in Switzerland, Krakow Castle in Poland, and our own St. Paul's Cathedral in London. If they can do it, so can we. Let's give applicants clear and positive guidance on how to transform their buildings in a sympathetic way, rather than a long list of what is unacceptable. Let's shape the future rather than waiting to be steamrolled by it. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bassi, and I'm sure that Councillor Pavlovic will take those comments into account when he looks at item number 7. That moves us on then. We're going to now skip to item number 8, the advertising bus shelter contract update. And I think Mike is going to take us through this one.
Thank you,
Mike.
Thank you, Chair. So this report relates to the ongoing handover of the bus shelter advertising concession contract. There's a lot of history to this. We've previously gone through a procurement exercise with a new supplier for the contract agreed. The change from one company to another requires the removal of existing shelters from the previous holder of the contract to the installation of new shelters with a new contract holder. Changing bus stops obviously has a lot of risks, in particular for residents using bus services who may be left without adequate shelter for a period. To protect against that, the Council's been working with the two suppliers to make sure there is a single and coherent plan in place to minimise the time taken between the old shelters being removed and new ones being put in their place. We're up and running with that. We've got 11 shelters have been changed over. 2 more should have been changed by the end of the day today. In fact, we're working at around a pace of around 3 a week during the winter months. Plans now underway, and that takes us to next summer. The exact end date depends on the later tranches of the shelters. During this process, obviously, we need to ensure that existing bus shelters are cleaned and maintained, in particular those belonging to the old supplier, the incumbent supplier. And so the decision today is about extending that arrangement, specifically the recommendation set out on page 104.20. In summary, it's to approve the new SLA with the incumbent supplier with a long stop date of the end of October. There are 3 elements to that recommendation. Happy to go through those line by line, Chair, or take them as read as required.
Thanks, Mike. I do have a few questions. My main query about this is why it's taking so long. Can you give any explanation about why it's taking so long to do the process of that changeover? I know that obviously it's important that we have bus shelters in place for residents, but it does seem to be taking quite some time for that changeover to happen.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. It's quite a complex arrangement in terms of lots of different pieces of the jigsaw having to be put together for it. So, for example, we've got things like planning consents and the planning process that we need to go through. We went through a period of designing new shelters specifically for York and the needs of York as well at the beginning of the process. The manufacturing of the shelters linked to that as well. And also the removal of the old shelters comes with some issues as well sometimes, where some of those have been in place since the late 1990s, so for quite a number of decades. And there are things in the ground that actually are not properly mapped. An example of that is a particular shelter on Tadcaster Road. A gas main actually was discovered in the vicinity of that shelter. So there are issues that sometimes we're not aware of as we go through this process. So it's quite a complex sort of jigsaw, and trying to get those two things to marry up, and also to minimise the time between the old shelters coming out and the new shelters going in. Obviously requires different permits for that work to take place as well. So it's quite a complex arrangement. But we are up and running with it, and I think we're going at a steady pace now. But we also have weekly review meetings with both the incumbent supplier and the new supplier to keep things on track and make sure that any issues we can deal with on a weekly basis.
That's great. Thank you for that. The other question is on the cost. Can you confirm that the cost has been factored into our budget process, so that where we will have additional cost, that has been, and where we won't be meeting our targets for income, that has been factored into the ongoing process of managing and monitoring the budget?
Gary, I may have to defer to you for some of the detail of that, if that's okay.
The cost to date was in the reported outturn budget to exec, and the additional costs will be in the next outturn, so they will be encompassed in the in-year budgets.
Right, that's helpful, thank you. Important that we are transparent about making sure that these things go into our financial planning. So the recommendations are to approve the new SLA with the incumbent supplier from 1st of January 26 to 31st of October 26, to delegate authority to the Director of City Development in consultation with the Director of Governance and the Head of Procurement to negotiate and conclude the proposed SLA in accordance with the terms and conditions of the current contract and the Council's contract procedure rules, and to delegate authority to the Director of City Development in consultation with the Director of Governance and Head of Procurement to negotiate and conclude any further required modifications and/or extensions to the SLA if deemed necessary. So I'm happy to approve that. I would ask that we have regular updates on this. I know that we've already built into here a review process, but I think it would be helpful perhaps in summer next year to come back with a report to a public decision session just on where we're at with it and the progress, because I think although I'm content to delegate that authority to the Director for City Development, I also think we do need some transparency on this so that we have that discussion in public. And on that basis, I'm happy to approve those recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That concludes item number 8. So I'm going to hand over to Councillor Pavlovic for his items, and thank everyone once again for allowing me to amend the agenda, and I'll leave you at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lomas. We'll just wait while everybody leaves. Thank you. So we will now move from what was the agenda item 6, which is now agenda item 7, which is the City of York Council Annual Complaints Performance and Service Improvement Report, April 2024 to March 2025. So this is a retrospective look, and I'd like to welcome Laura Williams, although this isn't her report.
No,
I do acknowledge that.
not my report, but I'll do my best. So the report gives an overview of how the 4 C's, so tongue twister, that's complaints, compliments, comments and concerns, raised with CYC have been handled over that reporting period of April 2024 to March 2025. The purpose of sharing the report with yourself is to enable effective scrutiny, to drive continuous service improvement and to ensure accountability. So I've just picked out a few headlines. The Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman did not raise any systemic concerns with CYC's complaints handling for the 2nd year running, which is a real positive. Where the Ombudsman did investigate complaints, of the 53 cases received, 50 were concluded during that reporting period, which shows there's been real active engagement with the issues that were raised. Where faults were found, and we had 7 upheld cases after detailed investigation, the council then implemented all of the required remedies in each case in a timely manner. So just for you to note, in the last few months, the team dealing with the 4 C's has moved across in a restructure to now sit within customer services. And over those last few months, there's been an explicit push to reduce avoidable complaints by improving customer experience and early resolution through clearer communication, more consistent planning and real attention to detail. So I think we've a real commitment to not just treating complaints as something that's completely negative, but actually using them as a really positive experience to learn and then to improve within service areas. So over the rest of the next reporting year, there's going to be a real emphasis on learning from complaints and embedding improvements. So things like training, guidance for teams and streamlined processes. And that's going to be key to reducing avoidable issues and improving overall service quality. So the recommendations for yourself are at paragraphs 10 and 11. So to note the performance details contained within the covering report and Annex 1, and to note the outcomes of the LGSCO and the Housing Ombudsman Service cases and the published performance data.
Thanks, Laura. I'm not going to ask you any questions because, as I say, it's not your report. However, I would ask that you ask Lorraine if she could just look through the report. There looks to be some errors in it. On page 35, the total compensation paid in 2023-24 was £200 related to the below categories. Property condition 3,400, moving to a property 1,500, and complaints handling 900. My maths is not great, but that doesn't look right. And there are a few literal errors. But if she could just look through the numbers and just make sure that when this is published, that we're as comfortable as we can be that everything in there is correct. And just for note, I am the member responsible for complaints currently within housing, and that's a request from the Ombudsman that all local authorities have a member responsible for complaints within housing, but as of May, I will be the member responsible for complaints across the authority in every department. With that caveat that we just go through that paper and just make sure that everything is absolutely correct, I'm happy to note the performance details, to note the improvement plan, and to acknowledge that that complaints, we don't want to eliminate complaints, because if we eliminate complaints, it indicates that people aren't interested. When you do as much as the council does, and just within my portfolio area, we do 20,000 different jobs, you're not going to get every single one of them right. What's important is that you learn from them, and that you are on a continuous improvement course. So recommendations 10 and 11 are noted, and thank you very much indeed, and thank the officers that have been involved in preparing this report. I shall just let Laura go, and then we will move to now what is agenda item 8, which is, let me just find it on my page. The historic windows planning, design and conservation guidance note. And I'm pleased to have both Becky Eads and Guy. Sorry, I've completely forgotten your second name. Hanson, of course it is. I've only known you for 8 years. Mental block there for a second. Can you introduce yourselves? I think you're going to be presenting this, aren't you, Guy? And if you can also address the points that Councillor Vassy has made, that will be incredibly helpful.
Thank you, Chair. So my name is Guy Hanson, Manager Design and Conservation Team in Becky's service area. So a lot of our work is inputting into planning applications, listed building applications. And so the purpose of this report is to enable the council to publish brief guidance on caring for historic windows and considering changes. And traditional windows and egg glazing, they make an important contribution to significance of historic areas. And historic England actually refer to windows as being the eyes of a building, super important. And touching upon your comments about explaining our position. It's just to explain that paragraph 3, where we say owners of any type of building have challenges in maintaining them. But for historic buildings, for the owners of historic buildings, they also have to navigate more controls and requirements. So being able to easily find simple, good guidance is important to encourage desirable actions and minimise the time and expense of pursuing options that might not be supported. So the purpose of the guidance is, if it comes across as negative, it's just simply that we're trying to describe 6 common types of work on windows and what the likely permissions regime is, whether it does require permission, doesn't require permission, and what a rough sort of direction of travel for a desirable approach is. Because, it's complicated, planning is complicated and nuanced. And so if it comes across as negative, it's because we're trying to simply put our position. So somebody considering a change, they've got a window, what do they do with it? They can sort of think, well, what sort of permissions do I need? That's I don't see that as a negative thing. I see that as a helpful thing, trying to minimise the time finding out advice. The local planning authority, we're not on the end of the phone 24/7. So the idea with this guidance is it's brief, so it's easy to read. It gives you a rough idea of the different types of work and the likely permissions. And then there's a piece at the end that gives you a sort of links to more further detailed sort of national guidance by Historic England. So it completely supports sensitive adaptation to buildings, and think, they've got a lot to contribute to, but we need to sort of base that in the context of the national best practice. And so the 6 types that we talk about very briefly are just painting windows. You'd have thought that's straightforward, but can be nuanced. Repairing windows on a listed building, adding internal secondary glazing to a listed building, replacing of existing glazing, so keeping the frames with slimline or vacuum double glazing on a listed building, replacement of existing windows with double glazed windows, so completely replacing them with new double glazed windows, replacement of existing windows with double or triple glazed windows where they're not a listed building, but they're in a conservation area. And so those are very common scenarios, and we tried to outline what is the likely permission, what the good practice is, and a few very brief comments about a good approach. That's the purpose of the notes. 6 pages. It's very, very brief.
In terms of addressing Councillor Vassey's comments.
Speak up.
Sorry.
I will certainly be.
Sorry, I should know better, shouldn't I? In terms of addressing Councillor Vassey's comments, we have a duty of care over listed buildings, and that is a balance that has got to be made. And that's what this guidance is for. It doesn't go into climate change or other aspects of policy, because that sits there, and we have a duty as a local planning authority to make sure that we comply with all relevant policy and guidance. We've got recent appeal decisions over windows in conservation areas. We have to take all of that into account as part of the decision-making process, and this is the whole point in this, is to help people so we don't get in a position where we have appeals or enforcement action. That's the point in the note that we're helping. We have a duty of care to listed buildings. We are, the character of York is its historic character, and we have a responsibility of that, and it's clearly making that balance while trying to help, and that's the point in this note.
Yeah, thanks both of you. Can I just ask a question about paragraph 16, the last of the 6 different scenario types, which is the replacement of existing historic windows with double or triple glazed windows, not in a listed building, but in a conservation area. And you've got in permissions, the need for permissions vary. As a guide, they're generally more permissive than those for listed buildings. So checking with the LPA what like for like means in detail is recommended, as it's subject to interpretation. How does that happen in practice? Would a householder, for example, ring you up, or do they have to put in a planning application or a pre-application to find out what the variable advice may be offered depending on what your house type is? I'm guessing. Could you just explain that paragraph a little bit more, basically?
Thank you, Chair. The reason I thought the need for permissions varies is firstly because of the type of building you've got. If you've got a block of flats, it's different to if you have a house, for instance. It's a lot more simple if you have a house. As long as you're not in an Article 4 area, you have permitted development rights. And in terms of what is like for like, if it's the same sort of window design, if you've got 4 panes of windows and they're currently in white, and you replace them with a new window with 4 panes and it's white, then that won't need permission. The point you make about how do you get permission, if you were thinking, oh, I'm going to make the opening a bit bigger or smaller, or I'm going to make it into, instead of 4 panes of windows, I'm going to put 8. You know, those are the sort, or I'm going to paint it black with 8 panes. Those are the sort of scenarios where it's sort of advisable to check with the local authority, because as Becky referred to, there is an appeal where the appellant lost, where they did that. They changed the design of the window and the colour. But the simple advice is really, if you're a homeowner in a conservation area, you can replace your windows without permission if you do something that looks exactly the same as you've got. And that's the course of least resistance. If you had a particular desire to change that, then speak to the local planning authority, and you would likely need pre-application advice.
Okay, so in that scenario that you've just described, for example, 4 windows that are single glazed, and you want to replace it with double glazed, basically what you would be saying is you need to have 4 panes of double glazed windows, even though that is really quite complicated to do, I'm guessing.
Yes, if you wanted to replace your single glazing in a conservation area with double glazing, and it's the same window design, that wouldn't need permission.
That wouldn't need permission.
It wouldn't need permission.
Right, that's useful. So just to then focus on the points that Councillor Vassey's made, which are very reasonable. My understanding of what you've said is that that's not what this is about. This is an easy lookup if you are already considering that change, to see which type you're in, which area you're in, whether you're listed, whether you're historic, whether you're in a conservation area, what you've got currently, and what permissions you're likely to need. I think the context setting, if you like, is more likely to come as part of the climate change SPD. And that's where I think we're going to spend a lot of time explaining just the very points that Councillor Vassey's made. I think they're 2 different types of paper. Is that your understanding?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I read a lot of reports. The purpose of me thinking, what would I find useful, is just something as simple as possible.
Yeah.
X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
What do I need to do? But absolutely, the imperative of climate change is super important, but it's not really the purpose of this paper.
No. But I think the points are incredibly well made and will be picked up, and I'm happy to work with, well, I know that Councillor Vassey is interested in working on the SPD on climate change anyway, so and I'm happy to and for officers to work alongside him on that, because he has a lot of knowledge in this area. So I think this is incredibly helpful. I think we should be doing more of these easy to read guides around the planning process, which can be complicated and can be labyrinthine in a lot of cases. And this is a really, really good start. So thank you, Guy, for doing it. Sorry for forgetting your name. And do you have any others planned for the future? I know you're working on some various design guides, aren't you, at the moment?
I mean, perhaps for discussion outside of this context, because they're not sort of approved directions of travel, but we do have things that are priorities to us. That again, because we get so many regular sort of issues popping up, the particular one that we're thinking at the moment as priority for us is around painting on buildings and things like that. But it's not something that we've brought to your attention. So, you know, we'll have a series of potential priorities, but obviously in terms of what we pursue, we would talk to yourselves about that.
I mean, I just think these how-to guides, if you like, are just really, really good, and I think it's a real benefit to residents and to the council and to officers. It just stops planning enforcement when things go wrong if people have got these guides. So, thank you very much for doing it. I'm happy to accept this. It will go on the planning website. Yeah, it'll go on the planning website, and I'm happy for that to happy for that to happen. So, thank you very much for that. The next agenda item is urgent business, and we have no urgent business. So, at whatever time it is, 10:33, I'd like to call this meeting to a close.